Who decides the fate of nations? Who redraws the borders of history? Who dares to challenge the world's rules? Who claims the last frontiers of power? Who will stand and who will fall? The year is 2025. A man stands on the world stage, his shadow stretching across continents, his voice a rumbling echo in the halls of power. This is the story of Donald Trump's second term. The ink was barely dry on the executive order. America, the world's largest economy, was pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement. Trump, defiant as ever, called it a bad deal for America. Across the heartland, factories roared back to life, fueled by coal and unburdened by regulation. Smokestacks pierced the sky, a testament to American industry reborn. But the world watched with a mixture of anger and fear. From the streets of Berlin to the beaches of Bali, millions marched in protest. The fragile consensus on climate change, painstakingly built over decades, crumbled. The global South, facing the brunt of climate change, felt betrayed. The old alliances strained, trust eroding like sandcastles in a rising tide. And in the Oval Office, a solitary figure smiled, convinced he had played his hand masterfully. The halls of the World Health Organization, once bustling with global health experts, stood eerily quiet. America, once the organization's biggest donor, had withdrawn, accusing it of being too close to China. The shadow of the pandemic still loomed large, a stark reminder of the interconnectedness of the world. But in the vacuum left by America, a new power ascended: China. With promises of aid and vaccines, China extended its influence across Africa, Asia, and even parts of Europe. The World Health Assembly, once a forum for global cooperation, became a stage for geopolitical maneuvering. Accusations flew, suspicion reigned, and the world watched as the dream of global health equity faded into the background. The virus, it seemed, had not only attacked our bodies, but had also exposed the fragility of the international order. And in the halls of power, the game of shadows continued, with nations vying for influence and the health of billions hanging in the balance. Across America, the clanging of steel and the hum of factories signaled a resurgence of industry. Trump's universal tariff, a bold move to protect American jobs, had taken effect, reshaping the global trade landscape. Ships laden with goods from China, Europe, and beyond faced steep levies at American ports. The cost of imports soared, sending shockwaves through the global economy. Inflation reared its ugly head, eroding purchasing power and fueling discontent. In the heartland, blue-collar workers cheered, their jobs seemingly secure behind a wall of tariffs. But on supermarket shelves and in shopping malls, the true cost of Trump's trade war became apparent. Prices climbed steadily, stretching household budgets thin. The American dream, for many, seemed to be slipping further out of reach. The world, once accustomed to the free flow of goods and services, grappled with a new reality, a world of barriers, tariffs, and economic uncertainty. The global trading system, carefully constructed over decades, teetered on the brink. The interconnectedness that had defined the post-war era was unraveling, replaced by a zero-sum game of winners and losers. The roar of tank engines echoed across the plains of Eastern Europe, a chilling reminder of the Cold War's dark legacy. Trump, long critical of NATO's cost to America, had made good on his promise to shake up the alliance. American financial contributions dwindled, and with them, the unquestioned military dominance the U.S. had held for decades. A stunned silence fell over NATO headquarters in Brussels. The once unthinkable was now a reality. America, the guarantor of European security, was stepping back. In Moscow, Putin sensed an opportunity. With NATO weakened and divided, he saw a chance to reassert Russian influence in its near abroad. Troops moved closer to the borders of Ukraine. The Baltics watched nervously, and the specter of conflict loomed large. Across Europe, long-held assumptions about security were shattered. The continent, accustomed to American protection, was forced to confront its own vulnerabilities. The old order, it seemed, was crumbling, and in its place, a new, more uncertain world was emerging. The Iron Curtain might have fallen, but the ghosts of the Cold War were back, whispering warnings of a future where alliances were fluid, and the threat of conflict ever present. The crackdown was swift and brutal. Across America, ICE raids swept up undocumented immigrants, separating families and shattering communities. Trump, fulfilling a campaign promise, was determined to secure America's borders, whatever the cost. Images of weeping children torn from their parents, of desperate families huddled in detention centers, flashed across television screens. Protests erupted in major cities, a wave of anger and indignation washing over the nation. But the administration remained unmoved. The border wall, once a potent symbol of Trump's divisive rhetoric, was now a tangible reality, stretching across the southern border, a physical manifestation of his hardline stance. The message was clear. America was closed for business to those seeking a better life. The Statue of Liberty, once a beacon of hope for millions, now seemed to stand in silent rebuke, a hollow symbol of a nation turning its back on its immigrant heritage. The world watched in dismay as America, the land of opportunity, retreated into itself, its borders sealed, its gates closed to the tired, the poor, the huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The halls of Congress, once abuzz with debate and dissent, were eerily quiet. Trump, emboldened by a string of legal victories, had successfully expanded the power of the presidency, bypassing a weakened and divided legislature. Executive orders flowed from the Oval Office, each one chipping away at the checks and balances that had long defined American democracy. The courts, stacked with conservative judges, offered little resistance. The separation of powers, a cornerstone of American governance, seemed to be crumbling. Critics warned of an imperial presidency, of a slide towards authoritarianism. But Trump's supporters cheered, convinced he was a strong leader who would restore America to greatness. The system, designed to prevent tyranny, seemed powerless to stop him. The world watched with a mixture of fascination and fear as American democracy, once a model for the world, seemed to be unraveling from within. The land of the free, the home of the brave, was now a nation deeply divided, its future uncertain. And in the Oval Office, a solitary figure sat, his pen poised, ready to reshape America in his image. The news sent shockwaves from Ottawa to Washington. Trump, in a move that stunned the world, had proposed annexing Canada as the 51st state. Citing economic and security concerns, he argued that Canada's destiny lay with the United States. From the streets of Toronto to the shores of Vancouver Island, Canadians reacted with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Protests erupted across the country, the maple leaf flag flying high as a symbol of defiance. Prime Minister Trudeau, caught off guard, condemned the proposal as an affront to Canadian sovereignty. The international community watched with a mixture of amusement and concern. Could a nation as large and as proud as Canada be absorbed by its southern neighbor? The very notion seemed absurd. But Trump, never one to back down from a challenge, seemed determined to press ahead, convinced that he could persuade Canadians of the merits of joining the Union. The world held its breath, wondering if this audacious gambit was just another example of Trump's unconventional diplomacy or a sign of something more sinister. The Arctic, once a frozen wasteland, was rapidly becoming a geopolitical hotbed. Melting ice caps opened up new shipping routes and access to vast untapped resources. And Trump, ever the opportunist, saw a chance to assert American dominance in this new frontier. His proposal to purchase Greenland from Denmark was met with laughter and derision from Copenhagen. But behind the diplomatic niceties, a new scramble for the Arctic was underway. American military bases sprouted up on Greenland's icy shores, their presence a clear signal to Russia and China. The Arctic Ocean, once a tranquil backwater, was now patrolled by warships and submarines from the world's great powers. The race for the Arctic was on, driven by a toxic mix of economic ambition, strategic calculation, and national pride. And as the ice melted, so too did the old rules of the game, replaced by a new era of competition and confrontation. The fate of the Arctic, once a remote and pristine wilderness, was now inextricably linked to the geopolitical ambitions of the world's superpowers. The battle lines were drawn in courtrooms and classrooms, in town halls and on social media. Trump, fulfilling a campaign promise to his conservative base, had launched a full-scale assault on transgender rights. His administration rolled back Obama-era protections for transgender students, banned transgender individuals from serving in the military, and appointed conservative judges who seemed poised to overturn marriage equality. The LGBTQ+ community, once hopeful after years of progress, found itself under attack. Protests erupted across the country, a rainbow wave of defiance against what many saw as a concerted effort to turn back the clock on civil rights. The culture wars, long simmering beneath the surface of American society, were now raging out of control. Families were torn apart, communities divided, as the debate over gender identity became the latest battleground in America's long and divisive struggle for equality. The world watched in dismay as a nation founded on the principles of liberty and justice for all seemed to be turning its back on its own citizens. And in the crosshairs of this cultural firestorm were the most vulnerable. Transgender youth struggling to find their place in a world that seemed increasingly hostile. The order came suddenly, a bolt from the blue that sent shockwaves across the world. America was ending its military aid to Ukraine, leaving the war-torn nation to fend for itself against Russian aggression. Trump, long critical of American involvement in foreign conflicts, argued that it was time for Europe to take responsibility for its own security. The decision was met with a mixture of dismay and anger from Kiev, where Ukrainian soldiers were locked in a bitter struggle for survival against Russian-backed separatists. As American weapons and supplies dried up, Ukrainian forces were forced to retreat, their hopes of regaining control of the Donbas region fading. The Kremlin, emboldened by Trump's decision, stepped up its military support for the separatists, sensing an opportunity to expand its influence in the region. The world watched in horror as Ukraine, once a symbol of hope for democracy in the face of Russian aggression, was abandoned by its most powerful ally. The fragile peace that had held for years threatened to unravel, raising the specter of a wider conflict that could engulf the entire region. The world held its breath as news broke of a secret meeting between Trump and Zelensky, the embattled president of Ukraine. The stakes were higher than ever, the fate of a nation hanging in the balance. Behind closed doors, a devil's bargain was struck. In exchange for a resumption of American military aid, Zelensky agreed to cede control of the Donbas region to Russia, effectively redrawing the map of Europe. The deal, condemned by many as a betrayal of Ukrainian sovereignty, was hailed by Trump as a victory for peace. But the price of peace, it seemed, was high. Ukraine, once a proud and independent nation, was now a fractured state, its territory diminished, its people divided. The Kremlin, having achieved its strategic objectives, declared victory, its grip on the region strengthened. And in the shadows, the architects of this Faustian pact congratulated themselves, their hands stained with the blood of a nation sacrificed on the altar of realpolitik. The world, weary of conflict, breathed a sigh of relief, but it was a fragile peace, built on a foundation of compromise and concession. The storm had arrived. The global economy, battered by trade wars and uncertainty, finally imploded. Financial markets crashed, banks teetered on the brink, and the world plunged into a recession deeper than any since the Great Depression. Trump, facing the greatest challenge of his presidency, declared a national economic emergency. The government took control of key industries, imposed capital controls, and launched a massive infrastructure program aimed at putting Americans back to work. Across the heartland, dormant steel mills roared back to life, their furnaces glowing like beacons of hope in the economic darkness. Highways, bridges, and airports long neglected were rebuilt and modernized. America, once the engine of the global economy, was now focused on rebuilding itself from the ground up. The world watched with a mixture of envy and apprehension. Could America, once the champion of free markets, succeed in forging a new path, one based on economic nationalism and government intervention? The answer, it seemed, would determine not only America's fate, but the future of the global order. And in the heart of the storm, a nation struggled to redefine itself, to find its footing in a world turned upside down. The long withdrawal had begun. American troops, weary of endless wars, were coming home. Military bases, once symbols of American power projection, were shuttered, their flags lowered for the last time. Trump, fulfilling a campaign promise to end America's forever wars, declared an end to the era of interventionism. America, he argued, could no longer be the world's policeman, responsible for solving every crisis, righting every wrong. The world, accustomed to American leadership, watched with a mixture of relief and trepidation. Would this retreat into isolationism make the world safer or more dangerous? Would the vacuum left by America's absence be filled by chaos or by a new, more multipolar order? In the halls of power, old alliances frayed, new ones were forged. Nations, once content to shelter under the American security umbrella, were forced to confront their own vulnerabilities, to forge their own destinies. The world, long accustomed to American hegemony, was entering a new and uncertain era, one where the old rules no longer applied and the future was up for grabs. The cracks in the European project, long papered over by bureaucratic pronouncements and wishful thinking, were finally widening into chasms. Trump, a longtime critic of the European Union, had thrown his weight behind nationalist and populist movements across the continent, fueling the fires of discontent. From the streets of Paris to the squares of Rome, protesters waved banners demanding an end to Brussels' rule, their anger fueled by a toxic mix of economic anxiety, cultural resentment, and a yearning for a return to national sovereignty. The European project, once a beacon of hope and unity, seemed to be unraveling before the world's eyes. Brexit, once unthinkable, had become a reality, emboldening Eurosceptic movements across the continent. The single currency, the euro, once hailed as a symbol of European integration, was now under strain, threatened by the resurgence of economic nationalism. The dream of a united Europe forged from the ashes of World War II seemed to be fading, replaced by a resurgence of old rivalries and suspicions. The world watched with a mixture of fascination and trepidation as the European experiment, one of the most ambitious political projects in human history, teetered on the brink. The image sent shockwaves across the globe. Trump and Xi Jinping, the leaders of the world's two most powerful nations, stood shoulder to shoulder, their hands clasped in a gesture of unity and shared purpose. The world had changed. The old alliances were gone, swept away by the tides of history. In their place, a new world order was emerging, one defined not by ideology or shared values, but by realpolitik and the pursuit of national interest. America, having retreated from its global commitments, had pivoted to a more transactional approach to foreign policy, forging alliances of convenience with anyone who served its interests. China, its economy booming, its military might growing, was now a force to be reckoned with, its influence extending across the globe. The world watched nervously as these two titans circled each other, their rivalry tempered by a grudging respect and a shared understanding that the future of the planet rested in their hands. The rules of the game were being rewritten, the old order swept aside, and in the corridors of power, a new generation of leaders emerged, pragmatic, unsentimental, and determined to navigate this new, more uncertain world. The future, once predictable, was now a blank slate, waiting to be written. Borders shifted, alliances broke. Yet America stood taller, stronger, louder, because history is not written by those who hesitate, it is written by those who dare. The world after 2025 was not a utopia. It was a world forged in fire, tempered by crisis, and reshaped according to a new set of rules. But through it all, one thing remained constant. America's unwavering pursuit of its own interests, its refusal to be bound by the constraints of the old order. Whether you agreed with his methods or not, one thing was undeniable. Donald Trump had left an indelible mark on the world. His legacy, like the man himself, would be debated for generations to come.